Hello. Um, Hoping that I'm gonna be loud enough. It's like nighttime and my housemates are asleep, but I don't know. This phone is so weird. Like it's so counterintuitive the way I have to like face it. Anyway, um, so I guess I'll talk about leftists. You know, um, I have a lot of gratitude to an appreciation for a lot of like supposed conservatives for, standing up for medical freedom and like free speech and stuff like that. Uh, Gun rights, all of which were leftist. I mean, there were foundational leftist principles. Like the left was founded on gun rights. Um, you know, the right to bear arms, the right of resistance, the right of revolution, free speech, freedom of religion. Uh, but uh, but I do see a lot of I mean, there are people on the right that are trying to use these, like trying to use the current tyranny as a way to kind of you know, own the libs and like promote their right wing agenda because they're saying like, oh, this proves you just need to follow Jesus and be and Trump and I don't know what. Um, I mean, hopefully in terms of Trump, hopefully a lot of them realize how Trump fucked us. But I mean, just because Trump is hated for the wrong reasons by the shit libs, but it's equally true that Biden is hated for the wrong reasons, or is often hated for the wrong reasons by the uh, conservatives because they, like, I mean, bless their souls and everything, but like, there's people who literally called Biden a leftist. And that is just so cringe, like it's I think I mean, it's so obviously not true. It's so obvious to anybody who understands anything about politics that Biden is right wing or at least centrist, that I have to believe that people who are calling him a leftist and a socialist and communist and all this stuff, um, that they probably know they're wrong. Like it's just a point of faith. It's something they need to believe because to hold their worldview together. Because like I highly doubt anybody took an honestly surveyed the world and is like, well, clearly Biden is a socialist left wing communist and all this shit. Like, but yeah, I find it very bizarre. Like, and it's so obvious too because the Democrats don't, they never call themselves leftists. I've never seen Biden call himself a leftist, and I doubt he ever has in his entire fucking life. So, but he has called himself a conservative. So has Obama. They both said that they were basically had the same politics as like Nixon or so. They were basically like, they're basically like what the Republicans used to be, which is just corporate centrists. Um, but there's for some reason ideologically, a lot of conservatives need to either believe and or um, convey, say that basically the Democrats are leftists and the Democrats are socialists and the Democrats are communists. Um, so it is troubling, like I mean, a lot of people I respect and have gratitude to for, uh, being on the right side of a lot of issues right now. But it worries me when I see them say such blatant lies. It's a blatant lie to call the Democrats the left. It's something that I'm surprised to see anybody say it who's not like you know, some boomer who used to like watch or listen to Rush Limbaugh or something. Like obviously those people are just brain dead and like yeah, they probably think I don't know. They don't think. But there's other people that are relatively sentient, like I'm not sure about Tucker Carlson, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's basically universal among Republicans and Trumpers to conflate Democrats and the left because uh, I'm not sure why. I mean, I'm curious. It's a curious thing. Like they have to try to believe in this kind of left versus right idea where supposedly the left is just about like everything bad is leftist and everything awesome is right wing. So it's completely ahistorical. Uh, you know, whatever. I mean, I think to some extent it's just like that's their team. Like they chose the right wing team, and so they can't admit that Joe Biden is on their team, that he's the leader of the global right wing. You know, he's the leader of global capitalism. He's the leader of the anti-socialists. Like he's the whole reason he was elected was to stop Bernie Sanders. And for a lot of Republicans, Trumpers, conservatives, just to acknowledge that fact would like destroy their entire worldview. It seems like, I don't know. That's what it seems like. They can never acknowledge that fact. They have to pretend that Biden is a leftist. And like Biden has uh he's done certain like PC stuff that's helped like quote unquote PC leftism is great for the right wing capitalists, like and even the Republicans are into that shit. Um so like when he like mandates that um schools have to allow trans athletes to compete against, in their or play with whatever gender they identify with, like basically um male to female trans, like playing sports, playing field hockey and shit with uh biological girls, and which it's very dangerous unless they're like you know very small like people. But in general, like biological males have thicker bones, even if even regardless of height, like they tend to have like um thicker bones, stronger muscles. So there's a lot of girls who have gotten injured, competing in sports against them, and they've just won a lot of you know medals and shit by just because they have the advantages of being biologically male. Um, so that's something where It literally has nothing to do at all with right versus left. Like right versus left is about like the oppressed versus the oppressors, like the poor rising up against the rich and against the governments and stuff. Whereas this is the government doing something that like they don't care. I mean, the government doesn't give a fuck. Like it's no skin off like Biden's back to like to force girls to get injured and defeated by biological males. But it gives him the cover to claim that he's a leftist, or not, or he wouldn't even claim he's a leftist, but at least for the pseudo leftists who shill for him, um, it gives them cover to say, "Oh, look, he is the leader of the left or whatever." But you know, it's pretty silly. Like it's pretty obvious that he wouldn't, that there's you could just like think of like I could basically talk about real leftist things uh for like a day. Like just I could just like list things for like a whole day probably that like Biden is against and will always oppose. So whereas this injuring girls, it has nothing to do with working class. It has nothing to do with freedom or equality or anything. It's just like some twisted shit that is designed to like. I mean, at the very least, like whether or not it's part of some sinister agenda, at the very least, it's just something that is meaningless to Biden, and it has nothing. It's not a threat to like the wealthy or something like. That's who Biden protects, and that's who conservatives have traditionally. Conservatism is not. There's people have to understand like conservatism is not literal. Conservatism is a political movement. It doesn't mean conserving things, because if so, every conservative would be a conservationist environmentally, but they're not, because conservatism it's not a literal word. It's just a moniker for Tories. They previously were called Tories, which I think is a better name because it doesn't confuse people. Sometimes it's better to have a name that has no meaning because it can just identify a group without pretending that they are conserving anything, because they're not, and they never have. Like the liberals uh, always were claiming to conserve. Like liberalism is based on the Magna Carta, and even the Magna Carta was probably based on earlier stuff. So liberals are just as conservative. I mean, real liberals are just as conservative or more conservative than conservatives. But, like, uh, conservatism is not, it's not good. It's a terrible thing. And to the extent that modern conservatives are standing up for freedom and are, standing up for our rights, they're not being conservative. I mean, bless their souls, but they're not. They're being liberals. And, it's strange in a way that people on both the left and the right who don't like the Democrats justifiably call the Democrats liberals. Um, so I mean, there's a lot of people on the left who at least they realize that the Democrats are not leftists, and so then they distinguish and they say like, oh no, we're the leftists, but the Democrats are liberals. But that's even worse because, I mean, in a way, because that's like just so blatantly untrue in the bare like it's one thing, like conservatives, there's a lot of things that they don't conserve, but there's also some things they do conserve. Whereas Democrats are not liberal in any way at all. They don't believe in liberty at all. And at this point, you could basically say their entire worldview is opposing liberty. So calling them liberal is like, I don't know. It's like calling the sun like the cold place. I don't know. That was a shitty analogy, but it's true. It's like just the opposite of true. Like they're not liberal. And a lot of great people have identified as liberal. And another thing is they don't identify as liberal for the most part. Like Biden doesn't call, like I've never seen Biden call himself a liberal. Biden knows he's a conservative. He knows he's right wing or at best a centrist. So I mean, there's a question of are there any true liberals or leftists? And I would say no, there are not, or maybe there are, I don't know. But there's probably not any true conservatives either. I mean, the fact is people are very you know, they're very deceitful, and there's very few people that completely are what they claim to be. And especially if it's something good, you know, like leftism is it's based on the concepts of liberty, equality, and fraternity. You know, leftism is a French word, French, you know, French origin, you know, term, and it was, you know, it was described with the slogans liberty, equality, fraternity. So, you know, it didn't, like, even the original leftists, a lot of them were fake. You know, I would say Robespierre was fake, and the other Jacobins in the French Revolution that were following him were basically fake. A lot of the Girondists or the kind of you know, like Lafayette types were pretty fake. I mean, it's the thing is, like, people are very selfish, so, or you know, a lot of people are very selfish, and so there's very few, if any, that are just going to be completely unceasingly serving the people from the moment they're born till the moment they die. And yet, that's what leftism means. It means serving the people. So, you know, by definition, there's nobody or virtually nobody who's fully leftist at all times. And like none of this should be like so revolutionary of an idea. Like a lot of what I'm saying is pretty basic. But you know, I mean, a lot of the leftists, a lot of people who do identify as leftists, like people like Jimmy Dore, people like me, like we hate the Democrats, even though we identify as, you know, I identify as a Democrat too, not the Democratic Party, but I'm certainly for democracy. I also identify as a Republican because I'm not a monarchist. And the very few people who understand these words, most of them would be the same as me. Like most people who understand what the words mean are, or at least a lot of them, like me, are Democrats and Republicans. I mean, it would be very strange to be a Democrat but not a Republican, since republicanism is just kind of like a broader term for like representative government. And then democracy is a more specific term, usually to mean more broadly representative government. Uh, but like, so a lot of the leftists, like there are people who do identify as leftists who do vote Democrat, certainly. But I would say there might be just as many. There might even be more leftists who don't vote Democrat. I certainly don't vote Democrat. Um, like the Green Party. There's a lot of leftist parties. They're small. They might not get a huge amount of votes, but there's also a huge amount of leftists and other people who just don't vote. Um, I don't know. It's it's pretty cringe, like when people like conservatives just call everything the left. Like they call corporations the left, the media is the left, the government is the left. Like, Joe Biden is the left. It's just like sometime in like, you know, high school or something, they decided that they were right wing and that they hated the left. So now anybody they don't like basically has to be called the left, even though none of those people identify as the left. Like, in the media, like CNN, they don't identify as the left. They don't, I mean, maybe somebody on there does, but like generally, no, they identify as centrists and they're blatantly right wing. Um, right wing is like people who support the rich and hate the poor. That's right wing. You can call it whatever you want, but it's always been since since right wing was a phrase, it's always meant people who support the rich against the poor. So, and there certainly are some fucking cringy scum who identify as leftist who basically are right wing and basically hate the poor. Um, but like I say, there's always fake people. There's always people posing as something they're not. Um, I mean, it's just, I don't know. Can't trust anybody in this world. Uh, but like, yeah, definitely the Democrats. I mean, like, I hate the Democrat. I feel like I hate the Democrats more than any Republican could ever hate them because Republicans just hate them in some like cheesy kind of half-assed way, like how the I don't know, the Niners hate the Lakers, or maybe I'm mixing up my sports, but it's like some sports like competition where they're like, oh, those damn leftist communists, but it's like, but in a way they love them, just like how CNN loves Trump because they need them. It's like, it's like, how would you have sports without two teams? You need the other team even if you supposedly hate them. Whereas me, I actually hate them. I hate the Democrats. I hate the Republicans for real reasons, because they're destroying humanity. Um, Not just some stupid fucking cheesy competition. Um, I don't know. I mean, I hope that one of the few good things, I guess, that could come out of this current tyranny of Biden and Fauci and everything is that there's a political, uh, you know, realignment where genuine leftists. I mean, I don't know if like I don't know if everybody if we have to identify as leftists or not, but at least people who are not like anti-left or whatever can like unite. Like basically people who are, I guess, populists. Populists just another name for leftists. Like left leftism, named after the left side of the French assembly, Revolutionary Assembly, which was the wing, the left wing was where the populist, the representatives of the people, the populace sat. So literally, leftism is populism. And, people misuse the term, including those claiming to be leftists, but it doesn't change the word. I mean, I'm very literally conservative when it comes to language. I don't, just because people misuse words doesn't mean that we should continue to misuse them. So, like, hopefully we can get enough populists to unite, and maybe their fifis can't abide the fact that leftism is another word for populism. Maybe that's just a bridge too far for people's worldview. But eventually, hopefully people will be able to acknowledge these basic facts. But again, I am grateful to the quote unquote conservatives who are actually being populists, which is basically the opposite of conservatism. I mean, conservatism is Toryism, which is it's another name for royalism. It's the partisans of the British monarchy, like the supporters of George III in 1776. Those were the conservatives. They were called at the time usually Tories. But in the next century, like in the 1800s, they adopted the name conservative, even though in many ways they're not really conservative. But, they're not literally conservative in terms of conserving anything other than royal privilege and elite, power. But yeah, so it's an interesting thing how the supposed conservatives in some instances are more populist, and then the supposed liberal leftists are in some instances more elitist. And it just shows how these words have lost meaning because of how badly they've been misused. But yeah, so I mean, I guess a rose by any name, as long as people are being populist and being leftists, it's of secondary importance what they call it. But when they're hollering about communism, communism is just used to mean Stalinism. Like, people who wouldn't know Marx or anything Marx wrote if it came on their face or something. Like, they just have no idea anything about communism other than the Soviet Union, and especially the propaganda they've heard about the Soviet Union that pretended it was such a worse place than the US or such a worse empire than the US, which I don't think is true. I think if anything, they're basically indistinguishable and largely run by the same Zionist friggin' reptiloids, people like the Rothschilds that were known to be, basically part of the KGB and MI6 and Mossad and basically the CIA. So, I don't know. I put up with a lot of this stupid fucking bullshit of these boomer conservatives hollering about the leftist communist Biden. But this is a video just to try to set the record straight a little bit. I mean, it's just telling when people have to lie. Like even people who are on our side on this stuff, it's kind of worrying when they feel the need to constantly lie and pretend that Biden is a leftist. It just tells me that their agenda is not pure. Um, you know, like, and yeah.